Moments later, he pulled me onto the bed with the same hurried, indifferent motion he always used. There was no patience, no affection, just urgency without meaning. We didn't even bother taking our clothes off. There was no reason to. I simply pulled up my skirt, and we went through the motions like two exhausted actors in a forgettable B-movie. It felt empty, devoid of heat or hunger. Not passion, just habit. A mechanical ritual pretending to be release, meant to distract us from the gray, worn-out lives we didn't want to confront. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have braced me for what happened next. The door didn't creak open. It detonated. A deafening blast split the room, rattling the walls and hitting me like a physical blow. A body flew backward into the space, landing with a crash so fierce it didn't seem human. I lay frozen, skirt pushed up around my hips, my limbs rigid as my brain scrambled to make sense of the chaos. Then I saw him, my husband. He stood framed in the doorway, tall and unmoving, his silhouette outlined by the dull flicker of a neon sign bleeding in from the street. He looked like a shadow pulled into flesh. The room was thick with sweat, cheap perfume, and the foul reek of betrayal. I glanced down. My affair partner groaned where he landed on the floor, trying to understand what had just happened. The same man who never kissed me like he cared, who only came around when it was easy for him, who never once looked at me like I meant something. My husband's fists were clenched, his knuckles split and red. But his face, that expression chilled me to the core. There was no yelling, no wild accusations, just a terrifying calm, a stillness that screamed louder than rage ever could. His eyes met mine, and in that moment, fear bloomed in my chest like a sickness. Not shame, not remorse. Raw, paralyzing fear. I tried to speak. Maybe to justify, maybe to beg, or maybe to lie. I don't even know. But no sound came out. Behind him, the door eased shut with a quiet click. Somehow, that soft noise was more jarring than the explosion that came before. Then he spoke. Get up. His voice was level, steady, cold. I didn't move. I couldn't. My limbs refused to cooperate. My heart thundering so violently it swallowed every thought in my head. Beside me, the man on the floor tried to sit up, groaning in pain. His nose bloodied. My husband didn't even acknowledge him. I said, get up. The words weren't louder. They didn't need to be. That tone carried weight. I scrambled, panic flooded my limbs. I yanked my skirt down, fumbled with my blouse, my hands trembling uncontrollably. Everything in me wanted to bolt, but instinct told me running would only make things worse. This wasn't raw emotion. This wasn't the fire of betrayal. This was colder, resolved, a sentence already written, waiting to be carried out. That's what made it so horrifying. He hadn't stormed in blind. He'd arrived prepared. The man beside me whimpered again, trying to crawl away. My husband stepped toward him and drove his boot into the man's ribs with surgical force. The sickening crunch of bone made me gag. My lover curled up in agony, wheezing. My husband knelt, grabbed a handful of the man's hair, and yanked his head up. You like touching what belongs to someone else. His voice was dead calm, too calm. Then, with terrifying swiftness, he smashed the man's face into the floor. The impact made a wet, nauseating sound. I gasped, hand fly in my mouth, too horrified to scream. And then he turned back to me. Get dressed. I was already moving, clumsily trying to button my blouse with numb fingers. My brain was spinning. Would he hurt me? Leave me? Forgive me? But his eyes told me everything. This wasn't a conversation. This was a sentence being carried out. He had made up his mind. And I didn't know where we were going, only that it wouldn't be anywhere good. Behind me, the man on the floor coughed and tried to speak. Man, listen. Another punch silenced him. A brutal strike to the jaw that snapped his head sideways. He collapsed with a groan. My husband straightened, brushed invisible dust off his sleeves, and looked at me again, his head slightly tilted. Let's go. My voice cracked. Where? He smiled. A small, cold smile that said everything without a word. I wasn't being invited. I was being taken. He reached for my wrist. His grip was tight, not violent, but firm, final, like the closing of a courtroom door. And with that, he guided me out of the room, never once looking back at the man writhing on the floor. That man didn't even try to stand. Maybe he understood, too. As we entered the hallway, it became painfully clear my husband wasn't enraged. He was composed, focused, and that made him utterly terrifying. "Please," I whispered, "let me explain." He didn't glance at me, just replied with two quiet words. "Not here." The blood in my veins turned to ice. Not here, which meant somewhere else. A place he had chosen. A place waiting. Outside, the night air hit like a slap, sharp, punishing. He walked to the car and opened the passenger door. I could have bolted. I could have screamed. But I didn't, because this wasn't a man who chased. This was the kind of man who waited, who let you run just far enough to forget he existed, then dismantled your life piece by piece when you least expected it. So I got in the car. The door closed behind me with a final, echoing thud, like the sound of a prison cell locking shut. The silence between us was unbearable. We drove through the city, streetlights streaking across the windshield in rhythmic flashes, each one ticking off a new beat of dread. I sat stiff, hands clenched tightly in my lap, eyes burning as I fought back tears. And then I saw it. That restaurant, the same place where we'd once celebrated our first anniversary, the one where he took my hand across a candlelit table and whispered dreams of forever. That place. He had chosen that place. He parked, turned off the ignition, glanced at me once. "Out." I stared at him, unsure. "Why?" His voice didn't change. "Out." Inside, the atmosphere was soft and romantic. Glowing lights, the low hum of laughter. Couples leaned across tables, fingers laced. Families raised glasses to birthdays, anniversaries, graduations. He didn't stop me from walking in. Instead, he guided me straight to the middle of it all, through smiling strangers and flickering candlelight, until we reached the table dead center in the room. Not tucked away, not hidden. This table had been chosen for one reason: visibility. He pulled out a chair for me. I sat. My heartbeat thudded against my ribs, so loudly I could barely hear the room. He sat opposite me, his expression unreadable, completely composed. Then he set his phone on the table. The screen was lit. A video call, several muted icons, dozens of names, faces I didn't know. "Take a good look," he said quietly. I glanced around the restaurant. They were here. People I knew, people we knew, my coworkers, his friends, members of my family, sprinkled around the room at other tables, pretending to sip wine or read menus. But their eyes told the truth. They had already seen it all. And now they were watching. He leaned forward, folding his hands. "Remind me," he said, his voice steady. "How long has it been?" My vision swam. My throat tightened. The sounds around us faded. Conversations died. Utensils paused midair. Even the music seemed to stop. "Please," I whispered. His eyes didn't blink. "How long have you been sleeping with him?" I could feel strangers watching me. A couple next to us froze, forks suspended halfway to their mouths. 6 months. I admitted, my voice catching in my throat. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, just gave a slight, cold curl of the lips. A smile, not a surprise, but a confirmation. He already knew. From the inside pocket of his jacket, he pulled out a black USB stick. He placed it gently on the table and tapped it once with his finger. "I installed cameras last month," he said flatly. "Bedroom, kitchen, garage, hours of footage, dozens of clips." My entire body turned cold. "Did you ever stop to think I'd notice?" he asked. "Did it ever even cross your mind that I wasn't as blind as you hoped?" Tears clouded my vision. "I didn't mean." "Don't insult me." He tapped the USB again. "And that's not even the worst of it." Then he reached into a folder and slid a thick document across the table. I picked it up with shaking hands. My eyes scanned the heading. Legal paper, professionally drafted. Divorce. And worse. It was brutal. Everything: house, vehicles, accounts. Either already in his name or frozen under emergency injunctions. My job? Gone. He had used his influence to make sure that door slammed shut behind me. My future evaporated. I could drag you into court, he said calmly. Give this to a judge. Your boss. Your parents. Hell, I could leak it online. He tapped his finger once against the table, then leaned in. Or, he added, quieter now, voice cold and sharp as a knife, you sign this tonight, leave by morning, and disappear. He laid a pen beside the papers. But if you even think about pushing back, if you think about fighting this, I'll destroy you completely. I stared at the pen, at the pages, at the quiet judgment wrapped around me. My entire life laid bare on that table. Every secret, every betrayal. So I signed, and the moment my name hit the page, he stood, collected the phone, the USB, adjusted his coat. Not a word. No final look. Just calm, deliberate steps as he walked out, leaving me there, alone, in ruins. But that wasn't the bottom. Not even close. She thought that was her lowest point, that the worst was over. I knew better. That was only the beginning. Her entire support system vanished overnight. Friends cut her off. Her own family shut her out. Her employer terminated her contract under a morality clause she didn't even know existed. The footage already circulating. Quietly, strategically, enough whispers in the right circles to ruin her. Meanwhile, I finished the job, closed joint accounts, secured assets, locked down every exit. Legally, financially, socially, I left her with no escape. She tried to push back, but it was too late. She had already signed everything away. One day, she called me. Just once. Her voice was cracked, barely above a whisper. Please, can we talk? I smiled. We already did. And I hung up. That was the last time I heard her voice. As for me, I walked away with everything intact. Left her buried under the weight of her own choices. Was it revenge? Maybe. Was it too much? You tell me.